Hello and welcome to episode 64 Medical Marvels in Space, the Future of Astronaut Care. We previously had several topics related to the satellite technology on this podcast, but we never really had anyone from the industry who would speak on space medicine. This is the opening topic, I would say, a base foundation that will be creating for the future episodes of the space medicine. So, without any delay, I would like to welcome Dr. Ekaterina Kostioukhina. Hi, Dr. Ekaterina. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Omkar. It's great to be here and to share some of the information that we have available from space to life on Earth.
Thank you very much. Yep. As I mentioned just before the starting of the podcast as well. Firstly, thank you very much for taking out time for the podcast. I mean, you have a really interesting background. You are into social service as well. You are into such a niche domain of the space industry where very handful of the cream led people basically work in this sector. So, can you provide us a brief introduction about yourself, like where you come from, then how you ended up in this sector, and especially the kind of niche domain that you have chosen, extreme environments and space medicine research. So, how did you basically end up in this sector, and how did you become basically a leader who is basically inspiring several other people in this industry too?
Well, that's a very good question. So, what comes to mind is when I was in college, and there was this saying that will go aim for the moon, and even if you fail, you will land among the stars. So, I think I took it a little bit too literal. And I ended up pursuing medicine because I loved the understanding of complex topics. So my special talent, you know how some people like dancing, other people like art. Well, my special talent is understanding complex topics, which pushed me towards science. And in science, the most complex topic that I found is the human body. So I chose medicine in order to learn forever about it, and at the same time, with that knowledge, to help other people when their body fails, to help them fix it. So that is medicine. But also in medicine, um, another concept that is quite important for humanity is exploration. We have been successful because we change our environment constantly, and exploration is an instinct that we have. But for exploration to be successful, we need to be able to adapt to these environments that we go to. And they're quite rough for the biological tools that we come with, our genetic material. And that's why we have to use tools that we have been building for all these times in order to be successful. And these tools become more and more complex. And the tools have been better and better with the application of scientific concepts. So that is how, in a short, um, couple of sentences and paragraphs, we ended up as a human species looking for the moon, which is the next endeavor, and then eventually Mars. And just that there are people like me who help out. It's fascinating to know that there are programs that are quite advanced with a lot of resources and with a lot of effort from other humans who are making this dream possible. And it's not just a dream that is a commodity, it is actually a necessity that we don't see yet. But as time progresses, as this planet changes, it is important for us to have a plan B and C in order to in order to survive. And the solution for that, as Elon Musk is saying, and others support it, is to become an interplanetary species.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with this fact. And I think to some extent, this was also showcased in films like Interstellar, which actually has been inspiring the generation still now. It's almost, I think, 10 years now that film has been released. So I really agree with that point. So, yeah, before taking a complete deep dive into the topic, because we also have an audience from the defense and security domain. So, primarily just to, have a right definition of the term. So, what is space medicine and why is it critical for the future of space exploration?
Oh, very good. We have to start with the definition. So space
Yes.
medicine is medicine, just as we know it on Earth, but space medicine is a medical specialty of the type of practice. It addresses the unique challenges faced by astronauts before, during, and after their mission in space environments. This type of medicine is critical for the future of space exploration, just as the field of engineering and rocket science are critical for the successful performance of their rockets and equipment. If there is some failures there, well, we have seen multiple rockets not make it. It's just because after analysis, it may be some kind of small piece of the equipment that malfunction. Well, the biological machinery that is part of this overall equipment is extremely important. That is, us humans, we are very critical when we are part of the missions. There's several missions that have failed because of failures in the biological machinery. And that's why it is important to have experts understanding and optimizing this component of the mission, which is the biological machinery, the human, with all its quirks and moving pieces, which are quite many.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, just to take a step ahead on the same lines. So, as you mentioned about, the I would say the long journey that astronauts also take. So, what are some of the most common health issues astronauts face while in space, and how are they treated?
In other words, an engineering talk that will be what are the failures that this machinery can have. And
Oh, yeah,
actually, yeah, there are many. If
yeah,
you look at it from that perspective, there are multiple ones. We can classify them in different ways,
yeah,
and we can talk books about it. But I want to focus on what is well known. So the immediate problems that we face, that many astronauts and now astronaut citizens and astronaut tourists complain about, is the problem of space sickness, which is something that happens immediately as we enter the low gravity environment. Imagine if you have had the experience of being on a boat during rough seas. Imagine that feeling of seasickness constantly, and you can't escape it, and it can last days. Or for women who have been pregnant, imagine that sensation. Um, well, in space constantly, 24/7, not just morning sickness, but morning, afternoon, day, night, all the time. It's one of the troubles that we are facing that we're still not being able to address very well, and one of the initial complaints. Thankfully, it doesn't last long because we're quite adaptable, which brings us to the next component, which is when we already adapt. So things can happen to our body that can make it counterproductive. For example, we are used to the gravity on Earth and the fluids. The fluids are the ones that are affected. So usually we have more fluid in the bottom of our body, but in space everything is the same. The gravity doesn't pull it down. So the fluids, they accumulate in the upper areas of the body, and that can lead to stimulation of certain receptors that are detecting, they're thinking, oh, there's fluid overload, and therefore you let out some of that fluid that can lead to dehydration. Other things that can happen is blood clots, because the blood, which is a fluid, starts flowing differently in different parts of the body. And there's some astronauts who had, unfortunately, side effects of blood clots. Then other things that are not part of the intrinsic environment, but just that can happen because we are moving around, is accidents such as cuts or exposure to chemicals, or, for example, pressure changes. We take pressure for granted on Earth because it's invisible to us. We cannot detect it with our senses, but it's so important. If you had the opportunity to experience different pressure changes during scuba diving, during the training, it is quite emphasized the importance and the dangers that can happen with rapid changes in pressure. So same thing in space, in the environments such as the International Space Station, or in the environments when we're in a spacesuit. As humans, there are different pressures that we are optimized for, our bodies have evolved with. But if the pressure changes, then effects can happen. And it has to do with fluids. It has to do with the dissolved gases that can lead to bubbles coming out of the solution and causing debilitating strokes.
Interesting. Yeah, as you mentioned about, I mean, these are very, very minor things, which I don't think so. Even the people working as an engineer in the space industry will be knowing completely about it. Maybe they will be knowing few bits and pieces about it. But I think radiation is also one of the prime factor, which basically I would say triggers these disorders, or maybe issues in the
Yes.
human body. So from your perspective, what are the primary health risks astronauts face during the long duration space missions?
Well, during long duration, it's different. And I focused on the other concerns because they are more
Yeah,
like the shorter term. But for long duration, that is when we have the exposure. So absolutely, radiation. It's in the dose. So the more time we spend in that environment, the more radiation has to become a problem. Especially, we are at higher chances of being in space when there is one of those beautiful solar storms that causes the beautiful auroras like the ones that we just experienced um, on Earth
yeah,
that went as high as Texas. We could see it there. But now it becomes a problem because we start valuing the importance of our environment on Earth, the atmosphere that covers it. So because we don't have it, then we have to compensate for that. But also we have the concept of that we become victims of our own success because our human bodies are so adaptable and resilient, and that is why we have been able to go to all these environments on the Earth, the extreme environments and the cold and the heat, different temperatures, uh, different creatures, different environmental factors. So what happens in space is that our body adapts, and there's the concept of use it or lose it. Um,
yeah.
and this is when the problem of muscle atrophy, which is when the muscles become smaller from lack of use, from that lack of gravity, becomes apparent. And one of the bigger problems that we are trying to figure out what to do with is when the humans, the astronauts, will travel for months and months to a project in Mars, their muscles and their bones will adapt to it because we're such adaptable creatures. And then this astronaut will step on the hard surface of Mars. And because the bones have adapted and they're brittle, this astronaut will break a hip, which can mean, just like happens on the Earth, the demise and death of this person. It will certainly not be glamorous, and it will cause a deterioration and problems for the entire mission. So these are the problems that is not just about being able to land successfully and not explode with the machinery on the different surfaces, on the different bodies, but also the body of the astronaut, the human bodies that are extremely important. And that's why, as you were mentioning, it is extremely important to work with our engineers who are designing the tools that the biological machinery, the humans, the astronauts will be using to compensate for these things. That's why at MIT, for example, the engineering department that is dealing with advances for space environments and for space inventions, they work very closely with specialists that also understand the the human body engineers or medical scientists or doctors in order to work together and build those tools as it pertains to fit with the body and its shortcomings or its characteristics.
Interesting. Yep. I mean, the next question that I would like to ask, I mean, I would say it's not bit related to the conversation that we just had, but just out of curiosity, how do astronauts basically prepare medically before embarking on a mission? Is it something similar to the movies that we see, where they just patch up everything in a style they go, or how is it basically? How it happens in the reality?
Oh, good question. So the movies, they do
Yeah,
have a certain degree of reality. They are based on some reality, but also they are, because they have to be quite quick in 2 hours, so they have to
yeah,
um, be more intense. But yes, there is a lot of correlation. So in this field, preparation is the key. So preventive medicine is actually space medicine. Part of it is it's through the branch of preventive medicine, because we want to decrease these emergencies as much as possible. And part of the prevention is screening. So you have to get the right candidates. And it's not about, unfairness, like in the movie Gattaca, when, for those of you who have seen it, there was this emotional component that he had a dream and he couldn't realize it because he didn't have the right genetic material. It's not about the emotional part of it. It is about the logical part of it. You want to avoid
yeah.
sending the wrong people to a dangerous situation. You don't want to
Yes,
send them for failure. And it's not just for their own good. It is about creating dangerous situations for others in their field, but also all the amount of effort that is invested in these programs. You have to have the right candidates. So screening for the right people is extremely important. And so far, we have different hypotheses and different strategies for thinking what is the right stuff for the human machinery, but still it is in constant evolution as far as gathering what leads to success. And then once you get the right people that you think are more likely to succeed, you gotta prepare them. So the astronauts, they undergo rigorous medical examination to find if there's anything wrong that can be optimized. They undergo a lot of physical training because you want to build up those muscles and that bone strength that takes time. So you got to do the exercises on Earth with the gravity. That way, when they are in space, this decay happens more slowly. And when it happens, you have more to work with. But also the astronauts have to prepare in simulations, in analog environments where they train in order to not allow the emotional component, that freezing when we're faced with a challenging situation, when they have the amygdala hijack. So they prepare for it. That way, when there is a situation, we know how to respond, because it's not about if, it's about when, and it's better to be ready. So it's about selection, it's about prevention and preparation.
interesting. And I would say, just we as focused on the topic of both, I would say on the fictional side of the movies and in reality as well. So, what innovative technologies are being developed to monitor and maintain astronaut health in space?
Oh goodness, Omkar. Well, for this question, actually, reality supersedes science fiction, because now
Okay.
we have technology.
Oh, that's great. Great to hear
Yes.
this.
Oh, yeah. So just to build up
Yeah.
expectations, right?
Yes.
Technology that is being used now is for the flight surgeons, which is the name for the doctors that are in charge of astronaut health, is they provide great service by teletransporting in a hologram
Wow.
form up to the International Space Station in order to provide a more comprehensive, a more human healthcare. So that is the kind of technology that we are seeing, that the astronauts are getting. But all this leads to the history of, for example, telemedicine. We have heard more about it, and many of us have experienced it during pandemics, when being in person was not something that was, it was dangerous to be in person, to interacting with humans. So we had to interact through devices as much as possible. And telemedicine, even though it was there for a long time, it actually took flight. But where did it originate from? It originated from space environments. The
Yeah.
challenge of not being able to have the doctors always on call, because
Yes.
even if you send the doctor, astronaut with the medical background, they're not able to do everything. And it's not recommended for doctors to treat their friends and family and themselves. So having that extra logical mind that will be able to see it from a remote perspective through telemedicine is extremely important and part of it. So that is just one of the technology. Then we have the wearables that now we're able to use that are collecting data, and this data is now being able to be analyzed with artificial intelligence and other data analytic tools in order to figure out what reality is, in order to understand the human condition, how we react to things, and what is our function.
Interesting. Yeah, I love the fact the way you mention about how science fiction and reality in reality it's actually basically outpacing the science fiction. And I was unaware about this fact of teleportation through the hologram from the International Space Station. Interesting, very great insight, I would say. I never heard it up basically in the industry. So
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
I'm really overwhelmed by this. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah,
imagine that's something that can be part of our reality. Just like right now, we are
absolutely,
communicating. I am
absolutely,
based currently in New Zealand, and you are in Europe, and we're miles and miles apart, but we're able to
absolutely.
communicate, interact, and share
Yes.
information. And for our grandparents, this was like witchery. It was science
Yeah.
fiction. So imagine for our
Absolutely.
grandchildren.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would like to also mention this fact. I mean, everything I think begins from space. I mean, even in the film industry, we have seen the cameras like IMAX, then even in the medical science as well, the MRI machines. I mean, all these technologies were first used in space, either to scan the stars or either to, picture the Earth through the IMAX cameras, and then it went into the other industrial sectors. So basically, the root of these technologies have always been the space. So,
Mhm.
I mean, it's because I think the complex technologies always take their birth in the space industry and then it goes into the other sector. So, I always tell people that, there might be less return on investment in terms of finances in the space industry, but you'll always have a great return on technology. Whatever you invest in the technology, it always will flourish in the other consumer market. That's what I feel in the space industry.
Indeed, it's like coming from the
Yeah,
stars, right? Like when they say from the
absolutely.
conspiracy theories,
Yeah.
comes from the stars. But I think part of it is the fact that we have this instinct for exploration, and we as humans invest a lot of our effort and not just work and time, but also thinking and curiosity. It's like an innate calling that brings the brightest minds. It also breaks barriers of collaboration. We have been able to join forces together in order to use the scientific tools, in order to
Absolutely.
advance our dream. And all that, as you mentioned, results in great applications for life on Earth.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And just, coming to that point itself, so what are the most recent breakthroughs in space medicine that are transforming astronaut care?
Well, besides the MRIs that you have been mentioning that have been
Yeah.
quite useful for
Yes.
medicine, and I've
Yes.
used them a lot in my day job. We have
Yes.
other interesting things that are coming up, which is 3D printing. And it is the
Interesting.
3D printing of medical supplies that can be done on site in order to save space, but also in order to ensure integrity. But also not just of like things. You can do 3D printing of organs. And in space, that is something that is extremely important, that is important to mention because it's going to open up everything. It's a big game changer because if you are able to print organs, which in space, it starts with harnessing the cell of the individual whose organ you want to print. Then, with specific techniques, you increase this number of cells. And then, with the 3D printing, you start printing it. And initially, the structure is very fine and it's very delicate. And on Earth, because of gravity, it will get squished. But on microgravity, it will be able to continue surviving this initial stage of being very fine and delicate. So you're able to print the organ. Now, there's a
Interesting.
big demand for organs on Earth, not just because we tend to wear our pieces, but also because we have an aging population that, just like in the cars, it needs organ replacement. That is extremely important because if you are able to successfully print organs in space, then you need to have infrastructure in space for those factories. And those factories, they need people building them and people supervising them. So you will have humans in this microgravity working. And those humans, as we were mentioning, are predisposed to all kinds of biological malfunctioning that require
Yes.
taking care of and optimization. And that opens up more for the space medicine industry. So medicine that is done for applications on Earth will require taking care of the people and the workers who will be doing this kind of work in space. So it's great times are coming, and they're coming from the stars.
Yes, absolutely. And as you mentioned about the 3D printing, so I was also curious because, a lot of buzz has been going on since the end of 2022, that is artificial intelligence. So, can you discuss also the role of artificial intelligence in space medicine?
Oh, artificial intelligence is extremely important. And I want to start by saying that it is important to practice with artificial intelligence because it is here to stay, whether you like it or not, whether you're afraid of it or you're not, whether you have an emotional response to it or not. It is something, Pandora's box has been opened. Artificial
Yes.
intelligence is here to stay. So either you know how to use it and it becomes a tool that you use, or just as a knife. If you don't know how to use it, like for example, if you give a knife to a baby or a gun to a child, it is not a good result and it will cause an harm. So same thing with artificial intelligence. It is important that you as an individual start interacting with it. That way you know what are the benefits of it and what are the shortcomings, because
Yes.
well, it has a lot of shortcomings, and if you rely on it you can get burnt a lot. But if you also are not using it as part of your daily routine, you start becoming at a disadvantage. And the world advances, the rest of the humans continue to advance, and they're using these tools. So it is important not to be falling behind. But also, something we can learn from cyberspace and these digital tools is that not everybody will be using them for good. Artificial intelligence is a tool, just like again the knife or the guns, that can be used by humans for good or can be used um, by humans for bad, like taking advantage of other humans. So if you don't have experience with it, if you haven't interacted with it, you are more likely to get the negative effects from it, either of not knowing how to use it properly or on having it used against you. So, back to space
Yeah.
medicine, artificial intelligence is used for space medicine, for example, to have interactions to make um, space healthcare more autonomous. There are certain questions that already we have some scientific experiments that show that when you ask simple medical questions to artificial intelligence, it is as precise and even a bit better precise than doctors on Earth, like the real humans, but also it has better emotional intelligence as far as like it's more compassionate, it doesn't get tired and snappy, and it is available there. So it will be part of that telemedicine, of that remote medicine, to make healthcare more autonomous. It is delegating some tasks that are relatively easy and that are, for example, part of
Yes.
algorithms. So we as human doctors, we follow algorithms. For example, if a person presents with headache, what kind of headache is it? Is it acute or is it chronic? And then we follow an algorithm. So instead of having biological intelligence, which is us human doctors being programmed, you can have the artificial intelligence programmed in the same way. And if we invest more in testing this artificial intelligence algorithms and programs, then we will be able to develop something that is quite useful to complement the healthcare that is provided in space. But we're not limited to space. We have a lot of remote environments on Earth. Currently, I'm in New Zealand, and in our program, we have rural health where there are people, there are farmers who are farming land, providing a lot of supplies for the populations in cities, but they're isolated. So when their body malfunctions,
Yes.
they need to have a helicopter ride in order to bring them to the hospital. But there are certain things that could be answered with space medicine, through artificial intelligence, through algorithms, through telemedicine, through wearables. So artificial intelligence, it's a big branch that is being studied by medicine in general and by the field of space medicine.
Interesting. You mentioned about the telemedicine. So, I mean, just to complete that arc of the question, so what
Mhm.
advancements have been made in the field of telemedicine, especially for the space missions?
Oh, yes. Well, COVID made
Yeah.
it
Okay.
more widespread. So
Yeah.
what happened so everything is interconnected because we are
Yeah.
humans,
Yeah.
and wherever we are, that is where we do our tools and our interactions. So telemedicine started as something that was happening um, according to like phone conversations or radio, but now we have more real-time video consultations with better connectivity. We also have more tools that the person can wear with wearables where that information can be sent to the doctor and also not just analyzed by the human and not just analyzed by the statistical tools of data analytics, but by AI boosted data analytics that allows us to actually have more understanding of the data that is generated by the person from their body, and also to have recommendations for what to do with it, how to compensate for it. And as we talked about the teletransportation through holograms, that is certainly, that is, it is being invested in something as glamorous as in space. But eventually you might have the benefit of having your doctor um, like that, or also chatbots. Your doctor might be somebody that is able to just listen empathetically. For example, in psychiatry, mental health is mostly entirely, it has migrated more and more and more to telemedicine platforms because you don't need to be there in person in order to have the salutogenic, which is another word for beneficial effect of having somebody to listen. But also, you may not need to have a person in order to allow somebody to do the practice of speaking out loud their problems, of thinking out loud, and then having the acceptance voiced by somebody else. So we are seeing a lot of advances that are starting in space because there is a lot of investment and glamour in space, but also because of the need
Yes.
to practice in analog environments on Earth. And then these analog environments, a lot of them are real world applications. Like Antarctica, it is an analog environment, but at the same time, it's a real environment where people need healthcare provided to them. So it is all interconnected, and a lot of these tools, a lot of these discoveries are being used, and that we are all impacted by them in our daily lives.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah, it was really nice to, completely uh, listen to this arc of telemedicine, like you mentioned, literally from phone to literally video consultation and how things have changed. So really great insights into these things. And yeah, just to take a little bit step back, and I mean, this question is from a perspective where we see that, of
Mhm.
course, there are not so many companies in the space industry who work on the private scale. I mean, when we compare the IT sector or maybe the electronic manufacturing sector with the space industry is a very small sector when it comes to the privatization part. So just to address this question from the supply manufacturing point of view, so how do space missions currently address the challenge of limited medical supplies and equipment?
Well, what they do is we're becoming more thrifty, more compact, and more effective.
Okay.
Because yes, we cannot hoard things and we cannot prepare for everything with
Yes.
by having all the supplies. So that problem has led to a solution that has amazing benefits, and we're incorporating 3D printing in order to print on demand whatever we need. Just like in the on Earth, we don't need to have all the books printed. Many agencies, maybe many editorials, are printing books on demand, so same thing is happening with supplies. And it's not only good to save space, but it is also important because many of the things that we have, they degrade, not just from their longevity, like things get old, but also because of the exposure to radiation. Um, it's not just radioactive things that decay, but also regular atoms decay gradually, and the more exposure they have to energy, such as radioactive energy in space, which is stronger than on Earth, the faster they decay and lose their function. Like, for example, if you leave something um, exposed to the sun, it will change color, it will become brittle, the
Yes.
plastic can disintegrate. So same thing with objects that you will bring to space. So it's not just expensive, but also they degrade and their function may not be reliable. So this 3D printing is quite a technology that has been useful, and not just of items. It eventually, as we mentioned, led to the 3D printing of organs, that is an industry on its own, but also printing of, well, in this case, it will not be printing, it will be more like growing their own medications, because what we're finding in pharmacology is that medications also decay. So you can bring aspirin, you can um, bring your own supplies of medications, but what we find out is that as time passes, those medications degrade and the concentration of the therapeutic material is much less, or it can even change to become something poisonous. That's why for that problem, one of the solutions is to mix the own ingredients. So you bring just a limited number of ingredients and then you mix them. Or you can have some of the medications, like antibiotics, be grown and produced by plants. If you
Wow.
inject the genes into
Yeah.
a specific, like yeast or specific lettuce is one that is being used a lot. So imagine if an astronaut starts developing signs and symptoms of infection, they just have to grow the lettuce um, and eat that specific type of lettuce to take care of their infection, which also takes time. It has its limitations, but that is something we are finding out that can be used in other remote environments, again, like Antarctica, or even in the States, for example. Um, it is a big country that it not only has big, large cities, but also it has remote environments. But also
Yes.
to become self-sufficient, you don't need to have everything centralized. People can start using this kind of medical strategies, and not just medical strategies, strategies for functioning and working in whichever environments they are in.
Interesting. Yeah, the thing about letters you mentioned, it's very interesting actually. I hope
Mhm.
the people who are listening to this podcast are going to take away a lot of key things. So yeah, it's mind blowing actually. And yeah,
Indeed.
just to yeah, absolutely. And just to come to the next part, I would say, of the question. So I mean, you mentioned about all this tactics, the way astronauts try to take care of themselves. So, how
Mhm.
do researchers simulate space condition on Earth to study their effects on the human body?
Okay, so we use different strategies and they're called analog environments. The
Yes.
goal is to simulate it as much as possible to the real condition as possible. But microgravity is not something we have managed to simulate yet. So for when we want to simulate microgravity, we use bed rest studies to see what happens when the human is not exposed to moving their muscles and the bones. For short duration microgravity, parabolic flights can be used, and that is where equipment is tested. So parabolic flights is when you have a specific airplane that goes up and down, up and down. So when it goes down and it's in free fall, you have some seconds of floating in space, but it is like very limited. And then when it's going up, then you have increased gravity, so you're like stuck to the floor. But at least those changes can be tested there. So microgravity right now as it is, it's challenging to test. However, we still are able to learn a lot from analog environments when you take analog astronauts, which is people who have the qualities of astronauts, and you put them together in an environment that is like the environment that they're going to go to. Like, for example, the International Space Station, or it will be an environment, a colony on the moon, or even smaller um, vehicle that will be traveling to Mars. So you take the people and you put them in that environment together with other humans, and you see how they react. So what we are seeing is that there's a lot of psychological factors that are posing to be a limiting factor in the success of the projects. And we have seen them in vivo, as to say, when astronauts who have gone for real life projects
Yes.
have sabotaged, well, not sabotaged, well, have contributed um, to the failure of that mission or the premature termination due to factors that are not very obvious, like, you know, an infection or a malfunction of the body that is very obvious. That's like
Yes.
a broken bone or something that is more straightforward. But have led to the dysfunction of the entire team because of psychological factors that are very real, but they are less tangible. So things like depression and anxiety and difficulty working, performance. You know, there has even been a protest in space because apparently humans are not machines and they need to rest. They cannot be told constantly that they need to work, 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 work. So during one of the missions, astronauts they notified mission control that they were on a strike. And from there, we collected data and realized that it's important to have scheduled time from just not doing anything. But from that perspective, it is allowing the brain to rest on what the brain wants to do. And just recently, we had a confirmation that for life on Earth, it's important to have some of those days too. In our modern environment, we work, work, work. There's lots of demands, and we have less and less time for those days of unscheduled activity. And apparently, those are extremely important for our performance.
Yes.
So we are learning a lot from those environments in space, but also we're realizing the importance of doing those simulations of what will happen to the human body and now mind, which mind is something that's very abstract. So it's better to call it brain because the brain is the one that generates behavior and what we call minds and all those processes that are for now less tangible, but they're very real and that can lead to significant consequences. That is the main emphasis now, the psychological factors of the biological machinery.
Interesting. And in general, I would say, as you mentioned about all this complete overview, and
Mhm.
I believe the complete space industry works on this factor that there is collaboration both on the international and the national level as well. National level, I would say it's more privatized, but international, it's something that involves a lot of government relations as well. So, what role do international collaborations play in advancing the space medicine?
A very important role, Omkar, because international collaboration is extremely important. As nations, we have different resources, we have different
Yes.
people, we have different talents, and the percentage of, just statistically speaking, the percentage of very smart people who have the talents to contribute successfully to a mission is small. So if we bring that together, we need it from all over the world. So this platform for sharing knowledge is extremely important and has led to benefits, as we talked about, for the entire human race. So it is extremely valuable. But also what we're noticing is that the component of a little bit of competition, which also has been part of the space industry. Like, for example, um, it is not well advertised, but China is not allowed in the international collaboration of the International Space Station for political reasons of dramas that are happening on Earth. However, that is also leading to the benefit of having um, competition that is relatively healthy, because you have different people with different resources, and through a backup plan, as to say, creating strategies for space technology. Like, for example, there's not just the International Space Station, but also China has their own space station that is present in space, where research is happening. So it is a parallel but complementary um, strategy that helps out. So not just international collaboration, but the concept of competition are valuable ingredients in this space race. That is it's a race not just between nations, but it is a race against time, because as we are
Yes.
seeing, um, climate change, this change, cyclical, or whether it is um, something that we created as humans, because we generate waste products like any other species. Well, this change in our environment is very real, and it's happening quite quick, and our bodies are not adapting to it. And the tools that we have created are not enough to adapt to it, as we're seeing with a lot of the water invasions to terrestrial environments that are happening all over the world.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a great connection you mentioned about the climate change and everything. The international politics is something that needs to be explored a lot. I cover on my podcast about the international politics and how it affects the space industry in general. But it would be really also great to cover it in the aspect where it also affects the medical science in the space industry. Because I have never thought of that angle, but I think this one question has really triggered me. So maybe in future, definitely we'll record one more episode on showcasing how this basically impacts. Because I believe whenever I mean things happen, we are seeing here in Europe the Ukraine war that is happening, and I mean the moment it started happening back in February 2022, uh, suddenly all the collaborations were stopped. I mean, because several European institutes over here uh, have been collaborating with Russia for over decades now, in basic sciences research, or maybe some kind of satellite components research. In fact, several of the European space agencies space missions were carrying the Russian components as well previously. But unfortunately, that is not happening. The knowledge transfer is not happening at the moment, and I think that's really a shame that even though there are so many instruments in the world, the space industry has to take a step behind just because of the international politics. But I hope in the future we can resolve this. But yeah, in later in the future, maybe we can definitely record one more episode, related to this topic. So yeah, coming
Yeah, but
back, yeah.
indeed, yes. And Omkar, before, I'm a an optimist. So I want to mention the fact that a lot of advances happen from war. So it is
Yes.
part of human nature to do wars.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, we just do that. It would be
absolutely.
great if we collaborated, but unfortunately, the characteristics, the reality is that we compete and that leads to
Yes.
wars. And we're not the only species. Like even corals secrete substances to compete with each other and to kill each other.
Oh,
So that is something that, yes, we don't like it. It's an unfortunate situation for so many
yes,
humans,
yes.
but it is a natural component of our species that hopefully we can decrease as much as possible in the future. But looking
Absolutely.
in the past, in history, space medicine, space industry was born and advanced significantly in wars. So those
Yes,
rockets that you see, they didn't happen because of curiosity. Didn't
absolutely.
happen just because of it was cool to do in science at the university. They happened as missiles to protect and defend. And then eventually
Yes,
that technology, there was a lot of money and taxpayer money and resources and need that was invested in developing that technology that in times of peace was further used for actually doing something as space exploration. So also military medicine has contributed significantly to medicine in general, but also the advances that the humans that are being pushed to the extremes, be it the ones that are being attacked or the ones that are doing the attack, they are also investing a lot of that effort into creating things. And hopefully, eventually, some of those inventions will be put for good, beneficial use as it was in the past. So there's a
absolutely.
light of hope.
Absolutely. I agree with you on this point actually, because I still remember, I think it was back in World War II when, the actual use of space technology kick-started. And I mean, whatever people might say, but it's at the end of the day, the Nazi Germany back then, what they were developing, the technology was basically scrapped from them. And even the Apollo missions, the Saturn V rocket actually was a brainchild of one of the scientists who was working, at that time in the Germany. So I think it was von Braun, if I remember very well. So I believe, yes, it's war is something that, of course, brings out, at the end of the day, something good as well. Of course, but as you mentioned, it's a part and parcel of our species that to create something we need to first destroy and first to like that. I think it's the rule of the universe as well. If something is created,
Yes,
something is
yes,
destroyed, and if something is destroyed, something is created on the other end as well. So yeah,
yes,
we
the
just have to, I
cycle of
think,
life.
accept it.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, it is it's something that needs to be addressed. It's like the elephant in the room. We are
Yeah,
uncomfortable speaking about that, but just like in medicine, we talk about uncomfortable things like poop,
yeah,
and things that
absolutely.
are very, not it's not something you talk over at dinner. Same thing,
Yes,
this behavior of war and competition and humans destroying other humans, it's an uncomfortable topic, but it is our reality. So, in your podcast, I'm glad that you're addressing this topic because it is
yes,
important to understand the reality. That way, once we understand how it works, maybe we can redirect this instinct or this behavior into something like more Olympic Games or
yeah,
different
absolutely.
kind of wars. Because,
Yes, yes,
wars, if you look at it from the action, it is about our leaders having disagreements, and they solve them by sending other humans to fight for them. Humans have nothing to do with this disagreement, so they are the representatives, the troops that are being sent to fight a misunderstanding or disagreements. But what if we can do it in a different manner, that is chess or different kind of competition that does not involve destruction or loss of life? So we still have a long way to go in trying to understand and rerouting these
absolutely,
behaviors.
absolutely, yes. So yeah, to just follow up on this same, I would say, putting up a layer of the question. So, what are the next big challenges for space medicine as we prepare for deep space exploration? Because I believe uh, though it's not the space race like the way it was. It is, I would say, more of innovative, healthy kind of competition that we are seeing these days. But still, like every other nation is trying to reach out beyond the Earth orbit. So, from your perspective, what are the prime challenges that will be in the from the space medicine's perspective when we as a human race start going towards the deep space exploration?
Yeah, when we go further and farther, so deep space exploration involves different challenges that we have not practiced yet. And it
Yeah.
includes the exposure to radiation much more. So we still have to figure out how to protect our scientists, our human biological machinery, but also the equipment that we're going to bring. But also what we're finding out is this the mind, the human behavior. If you look at the movies, like for example, Ad Astra,
Yes.
um, the equipment engineers did wonderful. The machinery did well, they had everything. Even the medicine did well. They were able to go into hibernation. All that was good. But what was the big problem there? The human mind, the behavior. The astronaut
Yes.
went rogue. Then the other astronaut, even though he was selected to have a perfect heart rate and not react with amygdala hijack and crisis, no matter what was happening, still it was not exactly quite right. So
Yeah.
for deeper space exploration, that means the factor of time. So there is the psychological part that we have certain needs. Just that we're realizing that we have the need for food and certain nutrients, we're realizing that we have the needs for specific wavelengths of light. We have the need for specific depth of being able to see things. We have the need for specific stimuli. We have the need for abstract things like hugs and strategies, coping strategies such as taking long showers are quite effective, but are not able to be used in space. And we need to find something that will help us with that. So a lot of it is still a question that is that brings more questions as we find some of the answers. And one of the other fields that supersedes when reality supersedes our expectations and supersedes the virtual and fiction is human hibernation. This is something that we are exploring with a group of scientists through international collaboration, the first stages of understanding hibernation in general in order to apply it for humans. Because with hibernation, what we're realizing is that it helps prevent the side effect of radiation because all the processes decrease, metabolism slows down, so it is a big help for that problem, but also the problem of the psychological concerns.
Yes.
But also the problem of bringing a lot of supplies with us, the problem of having accidents because when astronauts move, they bump into things. So
Yes.
human hibernation is an interesting concept that is emerging for this deeper space exploration possibility that is in the very near future. And at the same time, when we are asking the questions, we are realizing um, a lot of the ways and how the human body works on Earth. Like a clear example that is very interesting is that, cardiovascular disease such as stroke and heart attacks and obesity are a big problem on Earth. That's quite a challenge. No matter what we do, the problem still
Yes.
keeps growing. But when we see the bear, for example, the bear gorges on fats and berries and becomes obese and then goes into sedentary mode and doesn't move for months and falls asleep, and
Yes.
the fat levels in its blood increase significantly. But when it emerges from that sleep, it's doing great. It has no no side effects as we humans have with our problems. So
Yes.
there is something that is there to learn about these metabolic pathways that like we can learn from such abstract topics, from such science fiction like topics of putting humans to hibernate for deep space travel that can already be used for our problems on Earth.
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, I think these are the questions I think which need to be addressed. And as usual, I think we have made as a human race, I think we have made breakthroughs in technologies by looking at the nature. I think you gave the example of beer. So in a similar way, I would say it's when it comes to aviation, when it comes to aircrafts, it has always been the inspiration have been the birds. Looking at
Mhm.
them, I think the whole, the aircraft, the way we fly, I think those things have been changed. So I believe even in this sector as well, the way we take the inspiration from the nature, it's never going to go away, and I think that's the right way to stick to it. So yeah, I hope there are such advancements that keep on happening, because hibernation is something that I have always seen in the movies, but have never heard of it, for a long, long time. I mean, like going for hibernation mode for 2 months or 3 months or 4 months, something like that, as a human. So I hope in the near future we create a breakthrough in that segment, hopefully.
Yes, it is much more real than what we think of. Um,
Yeah.
it's a fascinating topic, but some of it is already has been used and attempted to be used years ago. Like, for example, for depression that is really hard to treat, or for some psychiatric conditions, one of the strategy that was being used, but it was not successful because we did not have the right technology of monitoring the function of the body. It was to put people to sleep for a long period of time, to like anesthetize them, give them medications, and put them to sleep for days and days. Um, some people were cured and they developed better function, but others unfortunately died because there was lack of monitoring for the functions, respiratory function. The body was depressed so much that the breathing was impaired, and well, that's a limiting factor. But now we have better tools to actually use these different strategies, and we have to part of the work that we are doing is to dig into history, dig into all those natural experiments that were done on humans for different kinds of reasons. We have to be very creative and very inquisitive, but also look at other creatures, how they do it. Because the reason why animals hibernate, many species do, is because conditions are rough. So they want to decrease their metabolism as much as possible to sustain life, because the definition of life is that we're constantly going against the laws of physics. We're constantly going against entropy. And for that, we need energy. So it's about using the minimal possible amount of energy to maintain the processes of life, but to decrease it as much as possible to overcome those harsh winters, overcome those lack of resources, or overcome the harsh environment of space that is a big problem for us. And what we're finding is that many species hibernate, including some primates. And not just that, we are able to induce it in non-natural hibernators with specific strategies, either with ultrasound or specific medications. Therefore, the implications is that it is possible in humans. We share common genetic material that if we find the right triggers to trigger hibernation pathways in our body, which is through the brain, we shall be able to achieve that proper hibernation, and therefore use it for the deep space travel. But also, what is interesting that we need to remind ourselves is that we already practice, well, not hibernation, but we certainly decrease our metabolic rate every single night when we do this process, this natural process of sleeping. Our heart rate decreases, respiratory rate decreases, temperature decreases, metabolic rate decreases. We don't eat, we don't defecate, or we don't urinate. things slow down. So we're already practicing a state of decreased metabolism. So the goal is to push it further and deeper in order to adapt to this new environment
Yes,
that we are heading towards, which is space and deep space.
absolutely. Yeah, that's a great explanation, I believe. Yeah. And yeah, I think we are reaching the end of this episode now. And yeah, the final question I would say it is not related to the topic that we are discussing, but I believe every a guest that comes on this podcast have something or the other to provide anecdotes or kind of key takeaways or kind of some, I would say, pointers to the students, researchers, and the scholars who are trying to make their pathway towards the space industry, or who are already in the industry and trying to scale up their position. So this, yeah, there are a lot of a student crowd and researchers who also listen to this podcast. So that's the reason I have this question. So, what message would you like to give to the researchers, students, and experts working in the space industry, especially the one who would like to make their pathway or carve their way towards the space medicine?
Stay curious and collaborative, because the work that you will be doing is paving the way for humanity's future in space. Every single contribution counts. As we say in science, we stand on the shoulders of giants. So you may not be able to solve and create solutions that deal with everything, but every single contribution is an essential key of the puzzle, of the big picture. That's why everything that you do, we gotta keep going. Also, that way we ensure that we explore safely and sustainably. It's important to keep pushing the boundaries of what we know and can achieve. And one quote that I give during my lectures that is very relevant for motivation, but it's also for reality, is I tell
Yes.
my students, dream big, because you know how we say the sky is the limit. But then with
Yeah.
science, we now know that the sky is not the limit.
Yes.
And if you happen to be Buzz Aldrin, my favorite quote that is extremely important that I follow big and I share with the people I encounter is that he said, I know the sky is not the limit because there are footprints on the moon. And then he
Yes.
goes even further to say, and I made some of them.
Yeah. That gives goosebumps for sure.
Yeah, it's like I get goosebumps every time I say
Yeah.
that, because it opens, it gives the component of reality to something that is so big and might seem impossible. So if he was able to do that, if so many humans, because there's a few who were
Absolutely.
able to do that, so if it is possible, imagine what else is possible from now on,
Yeah.
from what we can achieve.
Absolutely. 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 No, that's very true. I think I hope students, researchers take away a lot of key things from this conversation, and especially the final message that you mentioned to them, because I believe even though we are an expert in this industry and everything, there is still a pathway to learn. Today, I have been working in this industry for almost a decade now, but there are things that I was not at all aware that you mentioned today about the space medicine. So yeah, so even I became a student today, Yeah,
It's the
so there is
collaboration.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So there, I think there is always a way to learn. There is always a way to grow. It's just that we need to be quite down to earth and have that curiosity, as you mentioned, to embrace the facts, the embrace the reality as well. So yeah, thank you again very much, Dr. Katrina, for providing us such great insights. And I believe there are several other questions which have popped up during the conversation, and I hope to record few more episodes in the future with you on the same topics. So yeah, thank you very much.
Indeed, Amkar. And as they say in the good movies, it shall
Yes,
continue.
yes, yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah.